Okay, well, welcome to Astrology Lessons with Jody. I don't know what else to call it but that.
Perfect.
So, I've got my student here, Reiki? How do I
Ricky.
pronounce her name?
Yeah, Ricky.
Okay, great, awesome. So, what we're going to do is we're going to just start doing some astrology lessons like I used to do them. And what I mean by that is, I'll tell you a funny story of what got me started on astrology and what hopefully some of you guys will share the same fascination I did. Is that I grew up when this book, what is it? Sun Signs came out by Linda Goodman.
Hmm.
Huge book. It was everywhere. Everybody was talking. That was the first time people were going, "What's my sign? What's your sign?" Oh,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
remember that book.
first time people started talking astrology in the 70s because I was born in 60. And I remember reading that book and thinking to myself, I mean, like, I already can tell what people are like. And I really didn't believe that every Leo was like me. Plus, I didn't have a lot of Leo characteristics, even though it said my sun sign was Leo. I had some very unlike Leo characteristics, and it just wasn't ringing true. Now, mind you, I have learned since that with the high IQ that they told me that I have, I'm a bit on I have the ADHD, so I look for patterns, okay? And, I didn't know that at the time. I'm just going, this isn't computing to me. It's just not making sense?
Yeah.
And so I really kind of just shelved astrology and I went more into the whole psychic new age, field at that time because it was LA in the 70s, right? And the thing is that doing psychic work, doing healing work, it's very dangerous and it's very draining. And we, of course, were having all kinds of paranormal things going on. I was experiencing a lot of side effects to tuning into people psychically. I mean, it was really, giving me and plus I couldn't control it. 2 a.m. I'd wake up with a dream or a vision or hear something and it was just very invasive.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was just, and I remember I reached a point I was like but then somebody, oh my God, I still remember this now. Somebody said you need to meet Kenny Kingston. Kenny Kingston was this guy that every year used to have a seance with and call up Marilyn Monroe, and he used to talk about sweet spirit and things like that. He was an ancient old flaming queer, right? And there was a veterans hall down in Studio City, and what he would do is he'd rent out the veterans hall once a month, and about like God, 300 people would go there. And he would get up on stage and perform his readings on people, which is amazing to watch him like do the stage act. And then he would, of course, break off into groups, and he would take new psychics like me, who were learning, their craft, so to speak. You'd break off from like 10 people and you do readings, and you learned how to, do public performing readings that way, which, if you can imagine, very hard. And that was
Yeah.
one of the things that you had to learn as the psychic is no, you can't light your candles and tune in and get in the right frame of mind. And, no, we're in a freaking veterans hall with 300 people in there. And you're thrown out to these people, and you had to learn to actually tune in on such a laser focus to someone, right? That the noise, you just tuned out all the noise. It was a great learning experience as a psychic, right? But then I would come home from doing these events, just I would spend the next 2 weeks completely zombied out, just mentally in some other world, trying to
Yeah.
bring myself back to normal.
Yeah.
It was horrible. It was like running a marathon and then the recuperation afterwards only mentally. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was 16 years old at the time, and even my stamina was hard. Well, anyway, one night I was supposed to appear there, and I was in the back of the Veterans Hall and, trying to find the backstage door, right? And there was this guy in a trailer. He was just a little camper in the back, right? I thought he was a security guard. And he reminded me of that guy, Michael Parks. He reminded me very, very much of Michael Parks, the actor. Anyway, I just walked up to him and said, can you please help me find the back door to get into the stage? And he goes, oh, sit down for a second. And at that time, computers were very unusual. He had a computer in this trailer, and he asked me my birthday, and he pulled up the software that he had programmed. His name was Peter Stapleton, and he'd also been a programmer at IBM, but he was a sidereal astrologer, which I'll go into the difference in a minute. Anyway, never met this man in my life, right? And he starts telling me, I see your father left a few years ago. Um, I see that, you're having trouble in school. He goes, your mother is very psychic. You've been having female trouble since a young age. I mean, he just starts boom, 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 stuff that there's no way he could possibly know, right? He also said, I was wearing contacts. He goes, you're wearing contact lens because you've got vision problems, and you know, just completely blowing my mind. And then he hit me. He said, I was sexually assaulted when I was 15,
Oh,
and it was by a neighbor boy. He lived like, a couple of houses down, and he was a little older than me, and he had blonde hair. He literally says to me, now, no one knew this. Okay. He goes, I see you were sexually assaulted at 15. The guy lived down the street. You knew him very well. He was a friend. He had blonde hair.
ugh,
I'm, my mouth just hit the floor of this trailer because I had never seen the greatest psychics. I'd met Gene Dixon. I'd met, all these so called, great, phenomenal, world class psychics. Nobody knew this about me.
wow.
He even knew the course I was using, stage name, which they because some people have some very strange religious ideas about psychics, so they tell
Yes,
you to use a stage name, right? He's
yes.
like, he even knew that I was using a stage name, and so of course, I'm just like, I just looked at him and I go, "What are you looking at?" He was looking at the computer, and I said, "What are you? What? I have to know that. What are you doing?" And he said astrology. And now, mind you, I'm comparing to Linda Goodman's sun sign book, and I go, that's not any astrology I've ever heard of,
Yeah.
right? I'm like, what? I mean, like, it just blew me away. And he goes, oh no. He says, that's horoscope nonsense.
Yeah.
He said, this is your actual planets. Now, we differed in that he used sidereal astrology, and I should kind of quickly explain what I mean by that is that like religion, there are many views on astrology, just like there's many religions. A lot of people lump astrology all into one category. Okay. That's another thing. He brought up, oh, there's all these different schools of astrology. There's Vedic astrology, which, the Indians use. And it is very tied into their religious beliefs, with reincarnation and that kind of thing. And he goes, I use a computer. Explain to me. He goes, I use a computer because I use sidereal astrology. He said, you probably know more tropical astrology, that kind of thing. He goes, but I do both. And I go, what's the difference, right? And he goes, well, he said the truth is that when astrology was basically invented, which is at the time of the three wise men and Jesus's birth, he said at the time that started coming to be, he said the planets were in a certain position. And he said, in that position, you would be a Leo. And he said, but he said, science is showing us that the universe is expanding all the time. He said, so the reality is that the universe has moved since that time, thousands of years ago. He said, so if we look at the heavens right now from an astronomy point of view, he said, you would be a Cancer.
Oh,
Now, of course, I looked at him and I'm going, Cancer? No, I'm up here on stage performing as a psychic. I don't think I'm a Cancer.
right.
You know, I mean, and my moon Scorpio, which is very well known for among psychics. I mean, it is literally the sign of the natural psychic. You're going to tell me my moon's in Libra?
Yeah.
I'm like, And so he goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. He says, but, he goes, we're going to do both. He said, sidereal works off where the planets are right now. Oh, this is what I was worried about with my voice. Hold on a second. And he goes, tropical astrology is rooted in the Bible. And he said, because, it started at that time. And he said, yes, according, in that particular belief, the planets are here and you would be a Leo. He said, but you have to understand that's not really where the planets are. He said, so how could it be astrology? I said, well,
Ah,
that's a good question. You're telling me that the planets aren't even really there that I'm looking at. So, yeah, I mean, so, we started getting more into this discussion about how could he know that though?
right?
Right? How I said, I just want to know how did you do that? That's what I want to know. And to me, it was like the $1 million lottery. I wanted to know how he did that. And he goes, well, he said, to get to that point, he said, that's why I had to program the computer to draw, because it was true. At that time, we were drawing charts out of books, ephemeruses and oh my God, drawing a chart by hand used to take 2 hours because you had to calculate where everything was,
Oh,
draw them. I mean, back by hand, it literally would take 2 hours to draw a chart.
wow.
And boom, 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 he's just pulling them up on the screen. So of course I'm completely fascinated because I've also got Uranus conjunct my midhaven, and I said I have to know how you do what you do. You have to teach me. And he said to me, and I still find this to be true today. He goes, first I have to see if it's even worth my time to invest in you. He said, if you do not have the mark of an astrologer, I'm wasting my time. And
Wow.
I'm like, what the hell is the mark of an astrologer? I mean, it's
Mhm.
all brand new to me. And he goes, well, he says, we got to see where Uranus is. He said, unless you have Uranus angular or in your eighth house, basically, now what he meant by angular, of course, is on my midhaven, on my fourth house cusp, or the seventh, or the rising, the actual like crisscross of a chart. And he said, unless you've got Uranus angular or in your eighth house in some way or an eighth house ruler, he goes, you're going to play with it a little while and then you're going to leave it alone. He said, astrologers
Oh,
have a gift, and he said, it's in the chart and it's either there or it's not. And he said, otherwise, I'm wasting my time. So, of course, he goes, oh, you have Uranus conjunct your midhaven. He goes, boy, yeah, okay. He goes, we're good to go. He says, you have the mark of an astrologer, you
ah,
know? And so, he had one of my first lessons, I remember. I go, how did you know that my father left, me recently? He goes, well, he said the first three quadrants in your chart, first house, second house, third house. He said the third house is like your teenage years. And he goes, you have Saturn retrograde there. And he said, anyone who has Saturn retrograde, the father leaves at an early age. He said, the fact that it's in your third house would mean that he left, you know, when you were young. He goes, you're like 16 now, so it had to be, recently. I'm like, and then I was like, you can tell when. See, now one of my greatest barriers as a psychic was when. Okay, I could have a vision of something, but I didn't know if it was the past, the future. I didn't know if it was next month. I didn't know it was 20 years from now, right?
uh-huh. Yeah.
And I still remember I had a vision of, say, my future husband, which did turn out to be true, but I had no idea, when I was going to meet him or marry or any of that. So timing was important to me. I wanted to know, like, when, right?
Yeah.
And so here's this man saying, you mean I can tell when? You know?
Mm-hmm.
So, as we got to talking, of course, more, um, it was time for me to go on stage. I went and did my number in there, came out. I remember we went to Dupar's coffee shop, talked till like 3 in the morning, and then I'm like, let me take you home. And he goes, oh, I'm living in the trailer right now. And I'm like, why are you living in the trailer? Now, this is another thing about Uranus angular. Okay, we get it is a sign of ADHD or learning difficulties, especially my Saturn retrograde, my Mercury retrograde, all signs of learning difficulties, ADHD, and obsessions with my Uranus angular, which he had also. Okay. And he goes, well, he says, I'm programming this software to chart the stock market. He said, so I am calculating where the planets are to the exact second. And he goes, and of course, since he's a programmer, he goes, I'm programming in all the stock market information, back to the big crash. And imagine manually, this was 19, oh my God, this was 1976. So he was having to literally input this by hand in an IBM computer, basically, right? All he had these reams and reams of papers and books from I mean, total obsessive person, right? And
Wow.
here he's inputting the stock market into this, which by the way, he later in 84 made millions of dollars in the stock market using this. That's how he retired. But so for now, he's in his computer, like loading. He goes, I can't do what I do and pay rent at the same time. So, this is my project and I'm in this little camper. And I go, well, that's ridiculous. I got a spare bedroom in my house. I said, I tell you what, I said, you can take that bedroom, do your thing, I'll take care of everything, room and board. You just teach me how to do what you do. That's it. That's my room and board deal. And he said, yes. So he moved in for
Nice.
6 months. And he did. He taught me the most amazing things. Like this is the power of astrology. Like what he used to do is he would go out and hide somewhere in LA. He goes, I'm going to go somewhere. And he goes, I'm going to teach you how to tell exactly where I'm at using astrology. And that would be the challenge is he'd call me from a payphone and he'd go, where am I?
Wow.
And he taught me how to do it to the point where he would tell me, oh, you graduated our little lessons. Is I remember I drove down to the college that was down the street because that's where I thought he was. Because he goes, I want you to now get in your car and find me. Because he said, by combining your intuition with the astrology, he goes, I want you to be able to find me, which would be about missing person cases, right?
Yeah.
So, and I still remember I then almost ran him over on the college campus, and he gave me the thumbs up, like you got that one. We used to do skill drills. Another one you're going to tell people their question before they even open their mouth.
Oh,
And he goes, and then you're going to tell them what they look like and what they do for a living. Now, this was great trick for radio because people are calling in the radio show. You can imagine the silence on the other end when you describe them, tell them what job they do, and tell them their question, and they've not opened their mouth.
yeah.
So again, can you do that with this? Yeah, you can. And this is the thing: a lot of people write it off to psychic, and actually, no. When you learn this particular system of astrology and you do it right, it actually is very black and white. And the thing to me that also was appealing is, and he said this to me, he said that Uranus energy that you've got, with your intuition, he said, is one of the reasons why so many psychics wind up like, sick, cancer, destitute when they're older and die fairly young. He said they're burning out all their energy. He said, when you start doing the astrology, he said, you basically, when you sit down to do the chart, you're signaling your brain, okay, you can tune in now. And then when you put the chart down or close the computer, you're telling your brain, I'm off duty now. And he said, you keep doing this, you will train your brain to basically go on and off as far as, that part of your capabilities. And so for me, it was also what do you call it, a psychic tuning trick. Because it was very, as you can imagine, I couldn't go to school without the person next to me, and I'm picking up their dead grandmother. I mean, it's very, difficult to be
Yes. Yes.
social, right?
Yes.
Now, this is the thing: is as we did this every day, we'd have our astrology drills. Yes, we're doing astrology. Now we're just hanging out watching TV. I started conditioning my brain on, off, and it actually started, giving some control. Now, later, I began to get deeper into how can this work? Because that's the thing. As we started finding bodies and identifying murderers and finding missing pets, my brain, of course, went to how can we do this? How can I identify a killer based on the time a woman left her house? I mean, those things messed me up pretty good
Yeah.
mentally for a while.
Yeah.
Now, I do believe that I've resolved that. And that's why I say I'm very Christian in my view in the sense that I do believe that tropical astrology, which is what I'm going to be, showing you how to do, is something that is in the Bible, which we will go into in a whole other thing. There's actual biblical basis behind things like progressions and solar returns and all that. It actually, is in there. But essentially, no, I don't believe. And here's what I'm saying. I don't know. The planets don't cause an event. How could they when there's so many different methods of astrology? And when they aren't even where he says they are, right?
Right.
Planets don't cause the event. I look at what we're doing as there is a destiny. Edgar Casey, by the way, talks about this in astrology, that there's a bigger destiny set in place by whatever your view is about the creator of the universe. And the more you get into things like quantum physics and fractals and all that kind of thing, there is an intelligent design, you know?
Yeah.
So
There
why
are. There's
wouldn't why wouldn't it also have set in motion, the system of astrology that we're using here as far as and even the Bible talks about it in the sense of what is it? I knew every hair on your head in your mother's womb.
yes. Yep.
When
It,
I got a hold of these old books, on tropical astrology, on how to know what it, from conception on the health of the baby, and started tracking babies to see you could identify when birth defects came in, for example, or if the baby would survive. That
wow.